Hi everyone, welcome back to Extra Credit, and this is our 11th episode on ancient Greece. So last time we left off with the gargantuan tidal wave of the Persian army bearing down on the tiny little sand castle called Greece. And as the great king's invasion force approached, Xerxes did exactly what his father Darius had done before the Battle of Marathon, sending out his messengers to all the Greek city-states to collect a token of earth and water as a symbol of their submission. Once again, most of the Greeks were more than happy to acknowledge the matchless might of Persia and handed over the goods. But unlike his father, this time Xerxes didn't even bother to send messengers to his two arch-nemeses, Athens and Sparta. Because I mean, with like inflation and everything, you just can't go throwing these guys away. So to rewind a little bit here, in these years when Xerxes was raising his ultimate fighting force and moving heaven and earth to get them to Greece, what exactly had the Greeks themselves been up to during that time? After all, in the wake of their miraculous victory at Marathon in 490 BC, the wiser of the Greeks knew that for Persia, the question of revenge wasn't a matter of if, but when. And while many Greeks were quite content to stick their heads in the sand and pretend like everything was all right, one man couldn't quite shake the feeling that a storm was coming. His name was Themistocles, a general from Athens whose instinctive knowledge of the Persians came from hard-fought, first-hand experience. As a veteran of the Battle of Marathon, Themistocles himself knew how close his precious city had come to extinction and that the threat remained all too real. But 7 quiet years after Marathon, with most of his fellow citizens happy to go on with business as usual, how could Themistocles convince them to start prepping for Doomsday 2.0? Well, as it turned out, that answer was soon to be found in a stroke of luck with unimaginably vast, history-shaking consequences, because the Athenians were about to strike gold. Or to be precise, silver. You see, just south of Athens at a place called Laurium was a mining operation, and in the year 483 BC, while Xerxes was mustering his men from across Persia, the Athenians hit pay dirt. A new stash of silver was uncovered that flooded the city with riches overnight, and suddenly the hottest topic on the streets was what to do with it all. The idea that most Athenians liked best was simply to split the silver up into equal portions for each citizen so that everybody had a bit more cash in their pockets. But thankfully, not only for Athens, but for all the Greeks, our friend Themistocles had a dream. And not like one of those weird I had too much curry before bed dreams that Herodotus is always going on about. I mean like a Martin Luther King dream. Themistocles' dream was that the future safety and glory of Athens would be fought for and won, not on land, but at sea, by embracing the power of warfare on water. And with this vision in mind, Themistocles rose in the Democratic Assembly of Athens one ordinary day in 483 BC to make a speech that would change history forever, not only for his city, but the entire world. He argued that the new silver should be used not for a shopping spree, but for ships, specifically a brand new fleet of 100 state-of-the-art warships called triremes. A trireme was basically a floating missile powered by 170 guys whose job was to row their boat until the bronze ram smashed into an enemy vessel. The Athenians actually already had a few dozen of these things down by their docks, but building 100 more of them would mean that overnight the Athenian navy would eclipse that of any other city-state in Greece. But being the smart cookie that he was, Themistocles knew that the threat of Persia wouldn't be persuasive enough to convince his fellow citizens to take this plunge. So with his fingers firmly crossed behind his back, Themistocles claimed that the new ships could be used against one of Athens' enemies closer to home, a pesky neighboring Greek city-state called Aegina. Athens and Aegina had been at each other's throats for years, and in Themistocles' words, this new navy would finally tip the scales in Athens' favor once and for all. And, you know, it might come in handy for some other stuff too. Persia. Persia. Sorry. And in a moving display of democracy actually working, the people of Athens chose to shelve their short-term gain for the long-term good of their city and voted to approve Themistocles' plan. Yeah, those Those were the days. But as he stepped down from the speaker's platform breathing a sigh of relief, not even Themistocles himself could have guessed what a godsend these ships would turn out to be. In the words of Herodotus, so it was that, by forcing the Athenians to become sailors, Themistocles' speech proved in the long run to be the salvation of Greece. And as the people of Athens pulled out their mallets and dusted off their copies of Trireme Building for Dummies, it soon became clear that they had started this grand construction project not a minute too soon. Because after 7 years of eerie silence, it was now that reports began to trickle into Greece that despite all false alarms and wishful thinking, the Persians were indeed coming at last, with an army of unimaginable proportions. As the word spread amongst the terrified city-states, it was clear that most of the Greeks had already thrown in the towel and gone over to the Persian side. In fact, every single city-state in northern Greece had sent their tokens of earth and water to Xerxes, with many more in the mainland also following suit. But just as before at Marathon, so now there were some either brave or stupid enough to go toe-to-toe with the apocalypse and resist. And while panic gripped their countrymen, it was these brave allies who came together at a historic council that would decide the fate of the world for centuries to... Oh, sorry, wrong council. So with all due respect to Lord Elrond, the real history-making council was at the Isthmus of Corinth. Besides being an incredibly annoying word to say, an isthmus simply refers to a narrow strip of land with water on 2 sides of it. And the main isthmus in Greece was dominated by the city of Corinth. And as the allied Greeks who had gathered there looked around the conference table, they could be forgiven if they felt a certain sinking sensation inside. After all, out of over 1,000 Greek city-states, only 30 had chosen to fight. The situation was so bleak that, as historian John Hale points out, the real wonder is not that there were so few allies, but that there were any at all. Naturally, the loudest voices around the table belonged to Athens and Sparta, with the Spartans being chosen as overall allied commanders, despite the fact that they still hadn't actually done any, fighting. But the true mastermind behind the Allied strategy was none other than Themistocles himself, who was now the head of the city that, thanks to his genius, boasted the biggest and boldest navy in all of Greece. With the Greeks being so outrageously outnumbered, Themistocles knew that victory in the fight to come would be a matter of brains over brawn. Which is why a glance at the closest map was enough to give him just a glimmer of hope. With Xerxes' army approaching from the north, the Persians would be forced to squeeze their way through a narrow mountain pass known as the Hot Gates, or Thermopylae. At the same time, the great king's navy would be following along, hugging the coastline near a tight strip of water at a place called Artemisium. And Themistocles knew that the Greeks' greatest hope for survival was to bottle up the enemy hordes in these tiny twin gateways by land and sea, where the Persians' overwhelming numbers would work against them. What's more, he was also aware that despite its daunting size, the Persian navy was actually kind of a gong show. With so many different ships from so many different nations commanded by crews of such different quality, Xerxes' sea forces were definitely the weak link in his grand army. Which meant that even though the Greeks themselves barely had 300 ships to rub together, the powerful combination of unified leadership, high-quality training, and a fierce determination to defend their motherland at all costs gave them at least a fighting chance. But even these silver linings were no match for the storm cloud about to descend upon Greece in the fateful summer of 480 BC, when, after a year-long, earth-shaking trek over land and sea, the Persians finally arrived. As Xerxes' endless hordes poured into northern Greece and all the local city-states bowed down, the absurdly outnumbered allies had every reason to believe that the fight they were about to face would be their last. With tearful goodbyes to their wives and children, and one last salute to the temples of their gods, the allied sailors boarded their ships and set sail for Artemisium, well aware that their very lives depended on Themistocles' gamble. But with the Athenians taking the lead at sea, who would step up to hold the line on land? After all, with the Allies' main hoplite army still weeks away from mobilizing and Xerxes' forces coming closer every second, only a handful of men would be available to guard the crucial pass of Thermopylae, like a few grains of sand holding back the Persian tidal wave. For an absolute suicide mission like this, the Greeks would need soldiers from a city-state already legendary for its unbeatable army, home to the toughest, fiercest, and bravest warriors in all of— Yeah, I know, they're gonna say no again, I get it, we don't need to go over— Wait. What? Buckle your seatbelts, guys, because this just got real. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching today. It's always a great time making this show, and hopefully you're sharing this with somebody else who isn't following along just yet. This week's pop quiz is, what was a Greek warship called? Make sure to drop off your answer in room 215. As always, work hard, read books, play outside, and we'll see you next time.